If the youth vote, and yes, we're looking at you millennials, is critical to the outcome of this provincial election, perhaps the $64,000 question this time around is, what's on the minds of younger voters? Or maybe a better question is, are the traditional avenues of political engagement even getting their attention? Joining us now to consider that, on the line from our studio at Western University in London, Ontario, Laura Stephenson, Chair of the Undergraduate Program in Political Science at Western, and here in our studio, Saeed Selvam, Manager of Public Policy at the Laidlaw Foundation. And we are delighted to welcome you both to TVO tonight for a timely conversation about, well, let's start with this. Laura, the Oxford English Dictionary, their word of the year last year was Youthquake, the unexpected huge turnout in the United Kingdom election by younger people. Are you seeing any signs of a potential youthquake in the Ontario election this year?
Well, I wish I could say yes, but I really am not seeing that young people are getting invigorated by this campaign the way they have been in some more recent elections that we've seen, not only in the UK, but elsewhere. I'm not seeing that the issues are particularly striking for them. I'm not seeing that the personalities are, really drawing upon them. I don't feel that same energy, and I think that there have to be very specific conditions met for, to see those kind of youthquake outcomes.
Do I infer from that, like legalizing marijuana, something like that needs to be on the ballot?
Quite possibly. I think also, though, a really energetic, young or more youthful or different type of candidate can be very, very inspirational, I think, to people. I think if there's a specific issue that they really care about, obviously that would invigorate them. But I also think that young people often need to be kind of inspired to get more involved than they are at baseline. And I'm not sure that we're seeing that this time around. From
your vantage point at the Laidlaw Foundation, how much youth engagement in this election are you seeing?
I completely agree, Steve. I think that one of the biggest challenges that young people are facing in this election is not being well informed, but also not being spoken to. I think that a lot of the candidates out there are so concerned with trying to win the election and be very strategic in how they're doing that, that they're ignoring the fact that you have such a large demographic that is open and willing and excited to hear about platform ideas in terms of how you can address things like unemployment, how you can address things like housing, justice, education, and they're not being spoken to in a way that they should be.
I gotta tell you, and now admittedly I'm an old fogey on this stuff, but I don't get that. And I don't get that because two of the parties are talking about a minimum wage going to $15. The third party, the PCs, are going to leave it where it is right now. The Ontario Liberals have brought in free post-secondary education for low-income households. The New Democrats are offering things like, retiring your student debt and this kind of, there are clearly platform planks out there designed to appeal to younger people. Why is it not cutting through?
There are, and to their credit, it's fantastic that they put it forward. But what we're seeing is that when young people, especially on the ground, so the hand-to-hand politics, which is the candidates in the ridings canvassing, or the actual leaders going out there and speaking directly to young people instead of just going to a campaign stop and saying, this is what we're going to do for you, young people are smart enough to basically say, yeah, well, where's the money coming from? Or where exactly are we going to get the resources to make this happen? They've been through elections, especially Gen Y and Gen Z, where they've actually seen candidates and parties make campaign promises and not follow through on them. So they want to know what's different about this time. But also, again, to the previous point, is that you don't have compelling or charismatic leaders right now that are reaching out to the young people and basically saying, you know what, this is for you, this is what we're going to do for you, and this is why you should come out to vote.
Laura, I have heard, apropos of what Saeed just said about the leaders, I have not heard in my discussions with young people during the course of this campaign a lot of enthusiasm for Kathleen Wynne or for Andrea Horwath for that matter, but I have for Doug Ford. I've heard lots of young people say they think Doug Ford's kind of cool. Do you hear that from your perch at Western?
No, I don't, but perhaps I'm not talking to the same people. I think that Doug Ford is definitely proposing, doing politics differently. He's definitely standing for not the status quo, and I think that can be kind of exciting for young people. On the other hand, you know, I'm sitting here on a university campus, which is not typically the spot where you tend to see people on the right. And the party he's representing is not always the one the young people are going to be falling to. So I think it's an interesting mix, whereas, you know, his populism and his just, you know, do it different, fix it, right, and just get it done kind of attitude, I think that might be attractive. On the other hand, I'm not sure that the rest of his package is as attractive for young people.
Well, there is a vicious cycle about this too. I mean, in some respects, the school year is, you know, if not already over, certainly almost already over. And the leaders tend not to go to universities because young people don't vote, at least not in the numbers that other demographics do. So what do you do about that vicious circle, Laura?
I'm really not convinced that there's a perfect answer to this one. You know, it does seem that the more you reach out to students, as Saeed said, you know, the more that you actually speak to them or speak to young people directly, have those messages directly to them, not just putting them in a platform or mentioning off the cuff, you know, having ads to reach them, I think that's important. But we also know that there are lots of other ways that young people can kind of get interested and involved in politics, and it often has to do with what they hear from their friends or what they read on social media and what kind of information is being sent around. So to be fair, you know, a couple of ads aimed directly at young people that get circulated the right way, I mean, they could potentially make a difference to increase that information, or more just let young people know more about the information directly, and potentially that could mobilize them. It's an idea anyway. Right,
no, and you guys at Laidlaw had a great idea, which, what was it, just last week? You had the town hall, downtown Toronto. Yeah. 3 of the 4 party leaders showed up. Actually, ironically, Doug Ford did not show up, even though he has some popularity with youth. We saw a lot of engaged youth down there. What issues were they particularly hot about?
So they were talking about education. They were talking about justice issues, so especially for young people in remand in the pretrial detention system, there's a lot of issues there. The overrepresentation of Indigenous and Black youth within the care system as well, which is something that the Ontario Human Rights Commission just talked about. But for the most part, the young people there were happy to have a discussion with 3 out of the 4 leaders. They're very disappointed to not be able to hear from Doug Ford at that event, because no matter who gets elected premier, they still need to show young people that they are a priority to them, that young people matter. And by not even showing up to an event like that, it sends a strong message. So yes, Steve, definitely to your point, there are young people who seem very interested in Doug Ford's campaign. He's sort of the antithesis of Kathleen Wynne, so people want to see that change. But on the flip side as well, those who are active, those who are in the trenches, those who are engaged and know about the parties and have worked with them before as well, want to see something different, tangible, and actionable from the parties. Time
has just flown by here. I've literally got, Saeed, a minute left, and I want to ask you about this. We know that so-called YouTube influencers are a big deal when it comes to, you know, consumer purchases or any other number of different cultural hot points right now for younger people. How about politics? Do you see any evidence of it there?
I definitely see that influencers are something that political parties are very interested in. They're trying to actually engage them to engage young people. And I think that while political parties are talking about young people, they're not talking to young people. So they actually need to start talking to them. They can use YouTube influencers to try and do that. But at the end of the day, young people are smart and they need to be treated as such. So I think that as long as you start saying, you know, this is how we're going to address the affordable housing crisis, this is how we're going to address the lack of support for education, not just talk about it through a platform, but actually show up to events and say, this is how we're going to do it, and these are some of the places that we're actually going to take the money from to get the budget from to do it. I think that can actually go a long way. You got to treat young people like the smart people that they are and not assume that they're all just apathetic and disengaged.
Gotcha. Well, 9 days left for a Youthquake. We'll see if it happens. I want to thank Laura Stephenson, Associate Professor and the Chair of Undergraduate Program at the Department of Political Science at Western University, and Saeed Selvam, Manager of Public Policy for the Laidlaw Foundation. Thanks, you two.
Thank you.
Thanks.
The Agenda with Steve Bacon is brought to you by the Chartered Professional Accountants of Ontario, helping businesses stay on the right side of change with strategic thinking, insightful decisions, and business leadership. Are you on the right side of change? Ask an Ontario CPA.